in the Middle East and the increase in the level of Israeli genocidal action, as what I would describe as violence in any event against the people of Gaza and the West Bank. So I'd just like to ask Jack to begin his presentation. Thank you.
It was all sadly predictable. I quoted last week a little leaflet I picked up from the comrades in Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, on the demonstration last week, and they were making the claim, I wish it was true, that the reason why there'd been a ceasefire was because the Israelis had suffered such a hammering, and because of the great skill, which I'm sure they've got, but Hamas's great skill in guerrilla fighting, and the United States was so appalled by the sort of level of suffering imposed on Israel that they gave the go-ahead, the order indeed, for Israel to pull out and agree to some ceasefire. My own reading at the time was sadly very, very different. We saw the efforts by Joe Biden to sort of twist the arm of Netanyahu into some ceasefire. That didn't work. We saw the tension between the Netanyahu government and the Democrats. But when you had President-elect Trump, then things clearly changed. But in my view, at least, it wasn't because Israel had suffered so badly that the ceasefire was agreed. Indeed, if you'd read, and I can't say I read avidly, but I read enough of the Israeli press, over the last 2 months of the ceasefire, to be convinced that it wasn't a question of will the ceasefire come to an end. It was obvious that it was going to come to an end. And so what we had was, first of all, Netanyahu, the Israeli coalition government, basically demanding in the first phase of the ceasefire that Hamas released all the remaining captives, both dead and alive. And there's something like 50 of them, 50% of them are meant to be still alive. And this was meant to be something that came in the second phase of the ceasefire, which would go hand in hand with an Israeli withdrawal of all their troops from Gaza. So it was the Israelis that broke the ceasefire. There's no doubt about that. Israel kept troops along the border with Egypt, and it put in the extra demands under phase one for all captives to be released. So Hamas didn't agree to that, and what we saw unleashed is hell. And I don't know what the figures are now. I know last night, and it will be a constantly changing figure, that it was something like 500 dead in Gaza. I don't know how many injured, but clearly it will run up into the thousands. We could mention Lebanon. I'm not going to go there today, but the attack on Lebanon. So why has Israel done it? It's clearly not because they suffered so much, and now they feel strong. My reading of it really goes back to that horrendous press conference in the Oval Office with Trump standing alongside Netanyahu, announcing his Riviera plan. Now, I know some took that as a joke. I never did. Of course, we're not talking about the United States. Jared, his son-in-law coming in to look at these marvelous properties, and that was never on the cards. What was the significance of that is Trump basically giving the go-ahead, legitimizing ethnic cleansing. That was its significance, and that's why instead of standing there, mortified as Trump announced, oh, we're taking over Gaza as an extra colony in the Mediterranean. No, it was quite the opposite. Netanyahu was delighted because there was never an American plan to establish a colony in the Mediterranean. What it was about is giving the green light to Israel to get rid of the people of Gaza. That was its significance. That's why it was welcomed across the board in Israel by Zionist opinion, crucially by right-wing Zionist opinion. And so in that sense, Netanyahu and the coalition government was just waiting for their excuse, waiting their time before they unleashed all hell on the population of Gaza once again. The prelude was clear. You saw the cutting off of food supplies, you saw the cutting off of medicine, and the last straw, in terms of preparing, I think, for something worse to come, was the cutting off of electricity. Because, of course, what that meant wasn't that people sat there in the dark. It's water. In order to get water, you need electricity. In other words, desalination plants were cut off. And I don't know how people feed themselves. I don't know how they get enough to drink to keep themselves alive. But yes, we saw all hell unleashed. And not only has Israel unleashed a bombing campaign from the air, it's gone in on the land. And the Israeli defense minister is saying, unless Hamas gives up these 50 plus bodies, plus alive and dead, then indeed Israel will start annexing parts of Gaza. Again, an excuse. And we know it's an excuse, not least by the reaction of former captives, relatives of captives, and supporters of captives in Israel. Are they celebrating this attack? You must be joking. No, they've taken to the streets. They've gone to Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, protesting against the government's action, because we all know that the war aims of this coalition government had nothing to do with the release of these captives, 200 or whatever the particular figure was, or for that matter, eliminating Hamas. Netanyahu's generals would have told him from the very beginning that that's impossible. So we need to look for what's real in the war aims of the Israeli cabinet. And so it wasn't anything to do with hostages. It had nothing to do with defeating Hamas militarily. No, this was about colonization of Gaza. And to make that a viable proposition, you have to get rid of the Gazan people, all 2 million plus of them. Now, it's interesting. I sent to Comrade Yasmin last night some piece of journalistic commentary produced in the oil industry, because the oil industry obviously is looking at what's going on in the Middle East in general and is going, well, this is obviously going to send, the price of oil up. And what it was saying is that it wasn't a question of, this is a quote, that the final showdown with Iran is not if, but it's when. And, you know, my mind is taken back to Comrade Moshe Makover when he was talking, you know, a long time ago about the possible ethnic cleansing on the West Bank, and was saying that what Israel would be, you know, what Israel would require is what Netanyahu himself said decades ago, and that is some sort of international crisis to provide the cover for it. And so we need to be thinking in terms of this latest onslaught on Gaza, not just what's going on in Israel itself, not just what's going on in Gaza or the West Bank, but what's going on in the Middle East in general. We need to be putting what's going on here also in the context of America attacking the Houthis in Yemen and saying we are attacking Iran. Iran turns around and says nothing to do with us. And we understand, we don't know, but we understand a letter has been sent from Trump to the supreme leader. And that's basically stop arming, stop financing these militias, or else we will finish you. So I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. You know, I might be totally wrong. I'm not saying it's set in stone. I'm not saying it's decided. But it wouldn't surprise me under these circumstances that America stroke Israel, who knows who goes first, unleashed an attack on Iran. Now, whether that then produces Iranian missiles fired off in the direction of Israel, and the United States intervenes and says we're not going to allow, who knows, you know, what plan there is. But this would provide perfect cover precisely to open up the border between Gaza and Egypt and push people over the border. Also, it would provide the perfect conditions for pushing people over the other side of the Jordan River. I don't know, but that's what I fear at the present time. Now, in case comrades, you know, think that I'm just being one-sided, I'm not. I don't think Israel is all powerful. I don't think it can do just anything that it wants. I think against the Palestinians in Gaza, I think that in terms of the Palestinians in the West Bank, it can do a great deal. It can, you know, carry out ethnic cleansing, and failing that, it can leave people to starve en masse. I think that is conceivable. But it's also just worthwhile turning things around and actually looking at Israel itself, because what we've had is the outbreak of discontent within Israel itself again. And I'm not just talking this time about, you know, former captives, the relatives of captives and the supporters of captives. I'm talking basically about what I'll call liberal or labor Zionists. They've taken to the streets, and they've taken to the streets both over the war question, but they've also taken to the streets basically over the constitution question in Israel itself, because what we've seen is the sacking of the serving head of Shin Bet. That's the equivalent in Israeli terms, I suppose, of MI5, internal security. And this is really over the aftermath of October the 7th. You know, basically, it's, look, the government must have known this attack was due. You know, it was a year in preparation. It involved people, you know, with hang gliders. It involved people busting through, you know, border fences, you know, mock border offences. This is an open prison. This is an open prison with electronic surveillance. This is an open prison, not only with drones flying over it permanently, but also, with a society that's thoroughly infiltrated with spies. The idea that the Israeli government didn't know, well, there's only a few explanations. Either it did know and didn't want to know, or there was a massive intelligence failure. And the significance precisely of the sacking of the head of Shin Bet is he said, "I told you so." He was being told, remember, by these female border guards. This is the story in the Israeli press. We reported, we kept reporting, nothing happened. Well, that's exactly what the head of Shin Bet has been saying. I reported to Netanyahu. I reported to the government. It led me, at least, I don't know about other comrades at the time, saying, surely Netanyahu knew, surely he was complicit in this. I mean, I don't know what the truth is, but it really doesn't surprise me that someone told the government and the government didn't want to know. I mean, I put it no stronger. So this is the dispute at the moment. The government, in the face of this criticism from Barr, that's his name, has sacked him. And what we've had is the Israeli judiciary coming in and saying you can't do that. And we've then had the resurfacing of this dispute between the government, the majority in the Knesset, and the judiciary, with what I would call liberal or Labour Zionism backing the judiciary under these circumstances. Now, there are a lot of comrades on the left who look at these protests that were happening before October the 7th and looking at the outbreak of the new round of protests with hope. Here's our, how should I put it, salvation within Israel. Here's our agent of change. I'm more than skeptical about that. I mean, just listen to this quote. This is from a former head of the Supreme Court. Okay, I emphasize former. Nonetheless, I think that this is Aaron Barak. I think nonetheless he's speaking on behalf of the Supreme Court. I think he's speaking on behalf of the judiciary. I think he's speaking on behalf of liberal Zionism. And what he says, we have to prevent the tyranny of the majority. And that instantly reminded me of a former Tory minister, wonderful, reactionary guy called Quintin Hogg, Lord Hailsham. I don't know if that particular phrase goes back before him, but this was, a warning that we don't want a situation that our constitution is undermined by a majority government. Well, there's a big difference, I should add, between an Israeli majority government and a British majority government. In Britain, we have first past the post. So, for example, in Britain today, we have a thumping Labour majority on the basis of what sort of poll? Something over 30%. Well, in Israel, you have proportional representation, not perfect, but nonetheless, what this Barak guy is saying is accurate. What he's fearing is the majority, the tyranny of the majority as exercised through the Knesset, as exercised through the coalition government. And what we find, with comrades like Steve Freeman, The Guardian, what we find with comrades in the Socialist Party in England and Wales is here's their agency of change. Here's the progressives that will fight against the reactionary Netanyahu. I think this is delusional. We favor consistent democracy. We don't favor minoritarian governments, and we don't favor minoritarian Supreme Courts. We're not in favor of the Supreme Court exercising its tyranny over an elected government. That doesn't mean we've got any faith whatsoever in Netanyahu and the right-wing coalition. But I think it's delusional that the Supreme Court and a minority in the Knesset represent some sort of progressive force. It doesn't. It's a different variety of Zionism. And indeed, what you can get from this situation, and this isn't a prediction, but it's simply saying that one possibility under these circumstances is the overthrow of the Netanyahu government by those acting against this tyranny of the majority. And the only force that can act in that way isn't the Supreme Court, but the army acting in the name of the Supreme Court. It has to be the army. You have to have force behind you. And this really brings me to the other side of my discussion. And that is, under these conditions, what we're seeing is the renewal of conflict, armed conflict in Gaza, and the call being made by the army for reservists to turn up to their regiments and to do service. And what we've seen, I don't know what the overall statistics are, so this is purely anecdotal. So I'm just looking at reports in the Israeli press. Well, in my regiment, only 25%, 25% of reservists didn't turn up. Well, in my regiment, 50% of reservists didn't turn up. Now, in part, this can be because reservists are running their own businesses, they've got young kids, but there's also politics going on here. People aren't turning up because they don't support the war aims of this government, which have got nothing to do with defeating the evil terrorist organization Hamas. It's got nothing to do with getting war hostages back. It's about the survival, we all know, of Netanyahu, faces corruption charges. Also worth noting, Shin Bet was also investigating corruption charges vis-a-vis aides of Netanyahu vis-a-vis Qatar. Either way, there is the aim, in my view at least, of getting rid of the Gazan population. So what we have is a potential, this has been speculated, I'd be interested to hear from someone like Moshe Machover on this, because he studies the Israeli press. I don't. I sort of dip in and sort of get my impression. I think you need to have a better handle on these things to know how seriously you take it. I'm simply reporting to comrades that if you look at the Israeli press, not only Haaretz, but Times of Israel, blah, 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 there is talk, which as I've sort of tried to indicate, which I take seriously, a civil war in Israel. Not on the basis that this will come from below, with refuseniks deciding to arm themselves, but people at the top of the Israeli military basically acting in defense of the Supreme Court against a majority government. How Trump would react under these circumstances, I don't know. All I would say is if there was such an action, it wouldn't fundamentally change Israel. It wouldn't change the nature of the project. This would remain a Zionist state. It would remain a Zionist state that is reliant on the United States. That isn't going to change even if there was a military coup against a majority government. Now, that might mean that if it wasn't to the liking of Trump, that this talk is hyperbole. Nonetheless, it is worthwhile looking at because we shouldn't have the view that Israel is invulnerable, that it can do anything it wants. It does have internal politics. The crucial question, though, is to understand that it is reliant, it is dependent on the United States. And when push comes to shove, Israel acts on behalf of and is limited by the will of the United States. And therefore, I come to the letter this week. I've already criticized the comrades in CPGB-ML. I come to the letter by Comrade Joseph O'Connor Meldrew in this week's edition of the paper, where he says, well, we in SPEW, you in the CPGB, we basically have the same position on Israel, Palestine. We stand for two states. You sort of stand for two states because you call for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, from the West Bank. You know, what's the difference? You know, you're being unfair. Comrade, I'm very glad that you've sent the letter. It's good that you're reading the Weekly Worker, but I think you've got, to use a phrase, the wrong end of the stick here. It's true that if you have a superficial reading of what we have to say, you can find points of convergence. You know, that's true. But actually, we start off from a radically different viewpoint. As the comrade explains in his letter, they start from the point of view that you can win a socialist Palestine alongside a socialist Israel. And a socialist Israel will come about fundamentally, and I don't think I'm putting words in the mouths of the comrades, from working class unity that's brought about through trade union type struggles. So you can have the unity between the Arab working class and the Hebrew working class in Israel about pay and conditions. And this can win you socialism, and in the West Bank and in Gaza, essentially the same struggle can take place. And therefore, you know, both peoples can be one, or the working class of both peoples can be one to, well, let's have a socialism in both countries. We'll have a two-state solution. Fine, except it won't work. That's the problem, comrade. That what you find in Israel is that any attempt to raise trade union politics can only go so far. So of course there's trade union politics over pay, over conditions, over employment, of course. But once you raise high politics, do you support your government in a war? Do you support the withdrawal of troops from the West Bank and Gaza? Do you support equal rights inside Israel? Do you support Israel as a Zionist project? Do you support Israel as a Jewish state? Once you raise these questions, suddenly trade union unity disintegrates, and what you get is the politics of sectionalism, national politics. And of course, the Israeli working class, in my view at least, is a labor aristocracy. It's a privileged section of the population compared with the Arab section of the population. And although its privileges have been eroded since 1948, not least, you know, in the 80s, 90s, and all the rest of it, they are there. And all the Israeli, you know, ruling class needs to do is raise these the politics of nation, the politics of security, and working class unity disappears. Indeed, what you've had is a shift in the working class vote from where people used to vote Labour, you know, back in the 50s, back in the 60s, to where it's the working class that would tend to vote for Likud and parties to the right. Labour now is much more a party of the middle classes. But more importantly than that, the comrade then says that the existence of these two socialist states, an Israeli socialist state where Arabs apparently have equal rights, he doesn't specify what rights, but they have equal rights, a Palestine socialist state, this will be part of the struggle towards a socialist Middle East. Our starting point is exactly the opposite, that you have to have the struggle for socialism in the Middle East. We would say the struggle for Arab unity led by the working class. That has to be what comes first. And that enables you, if that can be made into a material force, if that can be made into a viable project, that is your lever that you can win over sections of the Israeli population, crucially the working class, to your project. So we approach it from the point of view of the regional working class, not from the point of view of how do we solve this problem within Israel stroke Palestine. Within Israel, Palestine, there is no solution. Only in the wider regional context is any sort of progressive solution feasible. And so, yes, we reject economism. We don't think it's a question. It's not that we reject trade union demands, but we don't think trade union demands in and of themselves are sufficient. They always prove inadequate. So we don't agree with the comrade. And we actually don't agree that you end up with two states. In our view, the Palestinians, I mean, in terms of how what borders you draw in the Middle East, all I would suggest, humbly suggest, is up to the future, for God's sake. But all you need to know is that the present day borders of the Middle East, and you can tell simply by looking at a map, as Trump says about Canada, they all got straight lines. They were drawn by French and British colonialists. You know, the idea that we should keep Syria, greater Syria, divided into, Lebanon, Palestine. So, of course, it's up to the future. I'm not saying anything, but the idea that you take that as sacrosanct strikes me as somewhat bizarre. But it's up to the future to do it. But the crucial question, yes, is the regional. That's what I would stress. I also think the comrade, this is moving on now, rather gives the game away when he talks about the party in Britain. He says, well, you want a mass communist party. We want to be where, the mass of workers are at. And he talks about the trade union movement, and he talks about Tusk. Well, we all know what Tusk is. It's worse than the Labour Party. It's not only tiny, it's worse than the Labour Party. Why? Because its federal structure actually gives trade union bureaucrats a veto, simply on the basis that we don't want to upset the Prison Officers Association or RMT or any other trade union that might care to join. Hence, I would suggest to the comrade his idea that all Marxist groups can join Tusk is, it's disproven by the facts. We did make our application at the beginning. We were turned down because apparently we lack social roots. Well, we readily confess we lack social roots. The problem is, comrades, so does Spew. I mean, I remember talking to Dave Nellis on the last demonstration. How many votes did you get, Dave? And I wasn't trying to persecute him, and he sort of mumbled, it's not, percent. Spew gets the same sort of miserable votes as we would get if we could stand under the banner CPGB. And we know that in terms of recently, remember the last general election, we're going to have a debate with our comrades in the Spartacist League, and they're telling us, oh, you should all join Tusk. And we were going, well, best of luck to you, comrades. They were rejected. They were turned down. And my humble suggestion would be one of the reasons they were turned down is their position, not my position, their position on prison officers and the Prison Officers Association. It shouldn't be allowed to affiliate to the TUC. I disagree with them, but I think this is what the Socialist Party was doing. They were acting as the censors. They were acting with the veto vote that the prison officers would have used if they'd been affiliated to Tusk. So the comrades' schema actually falls down It's already been tested, comrades, and only good boys and girls on the left are allowed to join, not naughty people like the CPGB that might raise awkward questions, not even naughty people like the Spartacus League are allowed to join either. And again, I think the comrade gives it away by talking about a programmatic fudge between reform and revolution. Well, the fudge is you reject, actually, you don't fudge it, you reject revolution. Now, we don't stand for revolution. We don't lay out, this is when we're going to issue the arms, but we do stand by the old Chartist slogan, and that is peacefully if we can, violently if we must. And our best scenario is that we get a government elected, it's a majority government, and we take up arms to defend that government against what Marx and Engels talked about in the 19th century, referencing Britain, a slave owners' rebellion. Remember, they supported the North in the Second Revolution there, the Civil War, and they looked to Britain. They said, Britain can have a peaceful revolution. You can say, yes, it's possible. No, it's not. But they used the example of America. You still will face potential slave owners' rebellion by the ruling class. So Marx talked about, give them bribes, throw money at these people, but you should still expect them to take up arms. And hence, if we have to use force, we will use force. And that needs to be made explicit. And that's why we raise, as a democratic demand, the question of a militia, right? How are you going to defend this government? You need to split the army. If you don't rely on the army, that would be naive. So we raise the question of abolishing the standing army. The comrade also says, oh, we agree with you on a federal republic. No, you don't, comrade. You actually stand for a breakaway Scotland. You stand for, I don't know, do they stand for a breakaway Wales? I don't know. Either way, you trail nationalism. You trail it. This is the wrong method. We stand for a federal republic. I hope, actually, that when a working class government comes to power in Britain, we actually don't put into practice federalism. Federalism is not our principle. Centralism is. So yes, in conditions of the Middle East, offer the Israeli working class the possibility of federalism. I would hope in the future they would turn and say, we don't want federalism. We want to join fully into a centralized state. We fear nothing from our comrades in the Arab Socialist Republic. That's a hope. Centralism is our principle. Federalism is something that we take up in exceptional circumstances. Anyway, I'm going to come to a windy-uppy and soon. Just to comment on a couple of other items in the news. We're getting an article on it. The Imamoglu in Istanbul has been arrested. His degree has been taken away from him. Of course, that is about the forthcoming presidential elections. I've only done a little bit of reading on this. My understanding is, and I could be wrong on this, my understanding is that with Erdogan, there's a term limit, right? He was, remember, prime minister before he became president. He changed the constitution, and I think there's a term limit. I'm guessing 3. And what seems to be in the offing, if I'm reading the press correctly, and hopefully our comrade Essen will, fill us all in and tell us what's going on. My understanding is his aim would be to bring presidential elections early so he can still stand. Right, that's my understanding. And who's his main rival? Was going to be the candidate of the People's Republican Party, CHP. That was so he's gone in for a preemptive strike. He's arrested them. Masses of people are on the street. Who knows what's going to happen? His calculation would have been, well, I know what the EU is going to do. It's going to huff and puff. They were never going to let Turkey in as a member. They always were going to keep us as an associate member. Talking membership of Turkey, that was never going to happen. So we can ignore Europe. They're not going to do anything against us. And in America, Donald Trump seems determined to copy me in terms of an authoritarian regime, and he admires people like me. So he's not going to do anything. At least that's my calculation that's going on inside of Erdogan's head. And I suspect he's right. That's my guess. And lo and behold, and I think I'm right in terms of the chronology, where Biden was talking about Turkey not getting these F-35 fighters. Remember, these are the fifth generation. These are America's latest warplanes. Israel's got them. Britain's got them. Turkey wasn't going to get them, but Greece was. Right? There's the announcement from Trump. Oh, we're reconsidering our bar on Turkey getting F-35s, because Biden was saying you should settle for revamped F-16s. These are fourth generation, old planes that they're basically shoving in the direction of Ukraine. Now that's, I would call that symbolic. And to me, that isn't quite Trump turning around and saying, yippee, yippee, but nonetheless, it's hardly punishment, is it? Now, amongst my mass base of weekly worker readers is not only the pub I go to on every Thursday. I've got a mass base in the SWP. When I go into the pub, there I have a line of comrades waiting to take the weekly worker off me. I'm not exaggerating by much, but I also have a Turkish mass base. They're down there, my Turkish restaurant next door, and I take the weekly worker in. And I say, here you are, Hassan. And, we have a tiny political. I say, what did you think of events with the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul? He said, John, that's what he calls me, John. He said, well, it's what you expect. It's a fascist country. And it's been a fascist country, according to my comrade, ever since Ataturk taking the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Turkey for a long boat trip out into the middle of the Black Sea and then giving them a swimming lesson, right? So Turkey has always been a fascist republic, and it's true that if you look at Ataturk's laws, a lot of the laws against class struggle are taken directly from Mussolini's constitution. The difference is, of course, that if we look at the party of Ataturk, it was something called the People's Republican Party, which was affiliated, at least when I was younger, to the Second International, the Socialist International, as it became, post-war, Cold War, we're talking about. And this is the party of the mayor of Istanbul. So the idea, that, in my view at least, that Turkey is just some uninterrupted fascist state needs some, cross-examination. And the fact was that when I was younger, and when Esin, our journalist, our comrade in Turkey, was younger, it used to be the army carrying out a coup on behalf of the People's Republican Party against the Islamicists. Now, what we've seen is the purging of the army since the Gulen coup. I don't know where the army now stands. I just don't know. I'm not going to pretend I know, but I do think that there's been a radical change within Turkey. I wouldn't describe it simply as a fascist state. And indeed, I'm a boring old orthodox Marxist. I sort of tend to go along with Trotsky and go, I can recognize a fascist movement when I see it. Trotsky's argument was, and okay, maybe it falls down with Nazi Germany, but the fascist state is being bureaucratized. The fascist movement is being bureaucratized, and it becomes progressively less fascistic. The purging of the SA, the purging of, the integration of the black shirts into the state, the merging between the elite in the fascist party and the bourgeoisie. Trotsky argued that fascism, in that sense, is in decay once it comes to power. That aside, we wait the article. All I would add in, though, is that whether this was part of the calculation that you deal with the PKK first before you make a move against the People's Republican Party and your main presidential rival, I don't know. But it doesn't make Öcalan's plan particularly, it doesn't give it traction, does it? If you're a PKK militant and you look at what's going on at the moment in Istanbul, on the streets of Izmir, on the streets of Ankara, people demonstrating in defense of democracy or what remains of a democracy, and your leader from prison is saying, well, let's go over to a purely legal struggle, your militants, I think, would tend to turn around and say, well, what? If they're banning the People's Republican Party candidate, don't you think they're going to be arresting or continuing to arrest our comrades as well? And my answer to that is, I think that is the case. Lastly, Rachel Reeves, we don't know what's going to be in her spring statement. I mean, I'm not going to second guess it, but we've had plenty of prior warning, and that is departments of government are expected to impose 10 billions worth of cuts, and that includes 2 billion of cuts in the civil service itself. So very Trumpian, very musky in that particular respect. She talks about red tape. And when I hear red tape, I go, yeah, sure. I know all about NHS England. We're not going to, say, well, we know that's not to do with doctors. We know that's not to do with nurses and physiotherapists. Hello, Moshe. Hope you can come in and comment on my Israel stuff. Thanks you ever so much. So we know that's not to do with the service. But when I hear governments talk about cutting red tape, I think about planning. And I not only think about building regulations, I think about, building regulations at the level of Grenfell Tower. So I don't go, whoopee, isn't it great that the government is getting rid of civil service? Because some civil servants check, are the building regulations being enforced? Or is big business allowed to do what the hell it wants when it comes to our lives, when it comes to transport, when it comes to aircraft, when it comes to the buildings, with the water that we drink? Is it safe? We need regulation when it comes to the alcohol that I occasionally imbibe. I want to know it's safe, relatively speaking. So what about the rest of the cuts? These are going to be cuts, we're told, on people on disability. This is going to be cuts, from what I hear, possibly against old farts like me, right? Old age pensioners, the triple lock, right? This is going to hit real people. But they're saying the pain is going to be worth it. We on the left, it's quite interesting. I mean, my position is quite clear. We should be against these cuts. We should be actually for a higher basic pension. We should be for higher benefits. We should be for universal benefits. We all know the figures. Once you start introducing means tests, load of people don't want to fill in the forms. Lots of people can't fill in the forms, right? And the fact of the matter is, then you have to have precisely red tape to check the forms. It's not just a question of AI. You need people to check these things. Either way, on the left, it's interesting that some comrades, quite rightly in my opinion, are saying no to the warfare budget, because Starmer is talking about upping the budget for so-called defense. Remember, from 2% to 2.5 to 3%. That's a real steep increase. He's talking about British soldiers being over there in Ukraine. He's talking about air cover. He's talking about Trident and how many Russian cities just one of these submarines can eviscerate. So he's talking big and tough. So some comments, quite rightly, are raising the question of the welfare budget as opposed to the warfare budget. I'm quite prepared to go along with that. On the other hand, notice the significant silence with some who don't raise the warfare budget. So note socialist resistance, note Alliance for Workers' Liberty, and indeed look at not it's the editorial position, but note one, is it Eric Lee, who's an American Zionist, who actually says, I support or I don't oppose the increase in the warfare budget. And he's quite right, because if you want to back Ukraine, you have to have what is called a defense industry, i.e. an arms industry. And either you buy from America or you cooperate in Europe or you have your own. Either way, you cannot just produce an aircraft that's specially for Ukraine. It doesn't work like that. And that goes for artillery shells, it goes for everything. So I point out the logic of the social imperialists. It's quite logical for these people to actually end up supporting the war budget. It was the logic that took right-wing social democrats in Germany to joining the government, to supporting the war efforts of their own imperialist side. And I finish with this. The problem precisely with the comrades that raised the question of not the warfare budget, but the welfare budget, is they say what we should do is tax the rich. Great slogan, but the problem is you tax the rich and the rich take their money out of the country. Mark Holland did a very good talk at the previous Communist University on this one, and he compared the rich to the goose that lays the golden egg. If you want to keep taxing the rich, you've got to maintain them. You've got to give them chicken feed, haven't you? You've got to keep giving them profits. You've got to give them the ability to exploit the working class ultimately. And if the British, finance industry doesn't exploit workers directly in Britain, it does it internationally. And the point is here that the most fluid form of capital is precisely the City of London. And so if you want to tax the City of London, comrades on the left, which is what they say, it will take flight. It will leave you. The goose that, lays the golden egg will take flight. Now that's different from expropriating. But are you going to expropriate on the basis of just Britain alone? How long could Britain feed itself in isolation? I mean, there was a program on the radio the other day. Is it weeks or is it less than weeks? I think it's less. Either way, again, having talked about the Middle East and the Arab Revolution, if we're going to have a viable route to socialism, we've got to think on a regional basis. Of course, we need a global strategy, but we also need a European strategy. So the comrade in Spew who's talking about an independent socialist Scotland and an independent, I don't know, is it a socialist republic of England and Wales? I'm sorry, this is hopeless, comrade. We would be starving, and it wouldn't provide a model that all the, everyone around the world is looking at to emulate. It precisely becomes what the Bolsheviks in their early years, comrades like Zinoviev, were honest enough to admit, we are starving. We need you to come to our rescue. We are no advert. And that's what our fate would be unless we unite with the German working class, the French working class, the Italian working class, the Dutch, the Belgian, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Greek, the Turkish working class. We need that continental perspective. So no to little England or little Israeli socialist projects. These are delusional. And I'll finish with that. Thank you, Anne.